Okay, so what you're saying is Dusty didn't really trust that this was on the up and up, or he thought maybe you guys were going to bury him, or he just wasn't trusting of the situation. Is that fair to say?
I think he might have thought that we were yanking his chain a little bit there. Now, and so, lo and behold, Vince comes down the next day to shoot the vignettes with us, and Vince and Dusty had a heart-to-heart talk, walking around Bobby Heenan's neighborhood, and decision was made. This is what we're going to do, and let's go have some fun with it. And we shot the vignettes. We shot the plumber first, and then we shot the pizza man, and like I said, I think we shot one other one down there that I don't really remember. But those, again, to talk about, we did it as a rib. We never looked at anything as, hey, let's do this as a rib. Won't this be a great joke? And let's spend all of this money and invest all of this time and energy on a television product because it's a rib. No, we really looked at it as we think this is going to draw.
Okay. Now, for those of you paying attention at home, at this time, there is a character on WWF TV named the $1 Million Man. And what is the $1 Million Man's servant named?
Virgil.
And you're going to tell me that he had no reason to believe that anything you're saying was a rib?
It wasn't necessarily a rib, the Virgil deal. It was just a rib. What if?
Oh my gosh! Listen to you spin.
It's a name that came up. It's a name that fit, and it worked at the time. And at the time, Dusty was in charge of Crockett in the NWA in the Mid-Atlantic territory. And it might have been suggested as a dig on Dusty, but at the same time, it worked. It fit.
Now, who may or may not have made that suggestion to name the manservant Virgil?
Wow, I really don't recall. I think it was Joel Watts, but I can't say for sure.
All right, so now I'm curious, and this is the wrestling nerd in me. When you're shooting stuff like this in Tampa, are you using a local television crew, or do you fly people down from New York? Do you get permits to go shoot all this? Or are you just doing this guerrilla style? How are these type of old school vignettes done? Because I think any classic WWF, memory has to include the way these characters were introduced through that series of vignettes. How did that come about?
Well, back in the day, it was easier to ask forgiveness than permission. So most of the time, if you're asking me how I did them, a lot of times I would just shoot first and let them ask questions later. But I always had my own crews. Kerwin Silfies, who's the director of the television show, Kerwin used to come down and help direct. But it was all of our own people. It was our own crew and guys that we worked with every week.
So when you and Bobby go down to have this conversation, is the crew already there, or do you fly them down the next day, or what's the plan for that? Like when he says, "Okay, let's do it, baby," or "That's a terrible Dusty."
Well, the crew had come in that day or that evening to shoot the next day.
So it wasn't a question of is he going to go for it. It's a matter of this is what we're doing. We're not here to really sell it.
Yeah, no, this is what we're doing. We were there to shoot vignettes. We were there to get this thing kicked off.
So when you're meeting with him, is there anybody else in the meeting, or is it just Bobby, Bruce, and Dusty?
That meeting was just Bobby, Bruce, and Dusty.
Okay. So after everybody kind of agrees and says, hey, this is what we're going to go do, is Dusty living in Florida? Does everybody kind of go their separate ways and we just say, meet you under the sink tomorrow? Or what's the plan?
Basically, yeah. It's we went back to my hotel, Bobby and I did, and, of course, Bobby lived there, but Vince wanted to know how the meeting went. There weren't cell phones at that time, so you had to go back and get on a phone in a hotel and talk about it. And he decided to come on down to make sure there was no interpretations or confusion on interpretation with the dream, so that Dusty understood that this was coming from Vince, and this is how Vince envisioned this character. And when they talked, everybody was on board, and Dusty loved it, and I thought he did a great job. I thought he jumped in with both feet. I thought that he did a hell of a job. We had fun with it, and that's what it was supposed to be. They were supposed to be fun, lighthearted, and to introduce him not as this ass kicker that he, I think, envisioned himself as, that he had always been positioned as the top babyface ass kicker. It was more of an attraction-based deal. The American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, and he's a common man. Everybody can relate to him, and let's introduce him that way. You got to remember, too, to the WWF audience, especially then, who only saw the superstars of wrestling on Saturday mornings, and they didn't know who Dusty Rhodes was.
Yep.
So this was a new character to them. To the traditional fan, they did know who Dusty was, and they got it. But no, it wasn't a rib. It was something to enhance his character and introduce him to a whole new fan base.
So tell me about the first time that you remember Dusty and Vince are in the same room. Would that have happened then in Tampa, or would he have been to New York by then?
Well, at that point, for this, you're talking about in the 80s when he came in? That was probably the first time they were together in person was that next morning in Tampa. At
that point, had they already negotiated the terms of a contract like they had?
Yes.
Okay. And Vince at the time is kind of famous for, he's not giving guarantees. It's a rough number. Okay.
So, no, opportunity.
What does that
was his only guarantee.
Let me hear the Vince McMahon pitch to Dusty Rhodes on opportunity when he's coming from headlining in Jim Crockett.
Well, goddamn, pal, you done great in the past. Imagine what you can do with the machine behind you. We've got action figures. We've got magazines. We've got it all. We've got pay-per-view. We've got Madison Square Garden. It was something that he was able to offer them that they didn't have before.
So they just imagined it was a lot more.
Yeah, and it was.
Yeah.
Normally it was. So to be able to give a guy like that the opportunity to come in and draw and make more money than he had previously, because there's more opportunity to make money, more revenue streams with merchandising and everything else, that I think that was what attracted Dusty to it initially.
But it also may be fair to say that, Dusty didn't have a whole lot of leverage. 1989 was not like 1979. At this point, it was one burnt bridge now in Atlanta, not forever, but for a little while. So if he was going to still stay in the business and earn a good living, it was pretty much New York or bust. Is that wrong?
At that point, yeah, Dusty was doing his championship wrestling from Florida promotion that he had there in Tampa, Turnbuckle Wrestling or whatever it was, and running shows in the Tampa area, and that was all he had at the time. So this was a godsend for him. This was a big opportunity that he didn't want to squelch. And you talk about ribs and everything, and I don't rib, I don't want to be ribbed, but probably the one and only time, maybe not, but I did have a little fun with Dusty when we were shooting things at different points, especially when we got to the butcher shop and we made him take his shirt off and put the butcher smock on him. And as I'm standing there looking at him after about the third take, and I realized, and the real butcher is standing right there, watching with us. Right. I'm looking at the real butcher, and I'm looking at Dusty. I'm looking at the real butcher. I'm looking at Dusty. And Dusty's smock is pristine white. And I said, he's just not dirty enough. And they have, in the back, in butcher shops, they would have like meat, and the juice and the blood would congeal and collect in the bottom of these trays and things like that. And so I might have taken a tray of bloody meat blood and dirtied him up a little bit to look like an actual real Americana butcher, if you will, and had a little fun with that, and kind of got it all over his puppies and just all over him to make him look like he'd actually been back there working in a meat counter, baby, cutting some meat and having a little butcher time. But he was, he was game. He did it all, the Americana taco stand and whole 9 yards, man. We had a lot of fun with those.
In my head, he would have been one take Johnny with a lot of that stuff, because he seems like he just has natural charisma. Was that fair to say?
He does, but again, with Dream, he does have natural charisma. And if it were Dream's idea, Dream coming out with it, I think he would have been one take Johnny. But he was trying so hard to become the common man.
Right.
That he was forcing it, and it wasn't as natural as everything else that he did. So it took a little while, and once he got comfortable with it, it was Dream. It was easy to do. So we had a lot of fun with that.
So in this first initial meeting now, Vince McMahon is in the room, Dusty's there. Any memorable moments or pieces of conversations or tidbits that you recall from all you guys being together for the first time?
No, Vince and Dusty went and took a walk and had a private conversation one-on-one. And Dusty came back with a great attitude and ready to go to work.
Wow. Okay.
So that was, I was not privy to that, and nor was Bobby. We all met at Bobby's house, and Vince said, "Let's have a talk, pal." And they went and took a walk. Walked around the block a couple times, came back, and he was ready to go.
Dusty had to be, and I don't mean this in a negative way because he's one of my all-time favorites, as you know, but Dusty had to be a little cocky or arrogant or confident or whatever you wanted to say. Did any of that rub Vince the wrong way?
At times it might have rubbed people the wrong way, but you know what? Vince rubs people the wrong way sometimes for the same reasons. And, you can be cocky and arrogant if you can back it up.
Right.
And Dream could back it up. Dream had done all those things. Dream was the man, He was on top of the mountain, and nobody could touch Dusty Rhodes in a lot of respects. So him walking in with the chip on his shoulder, it was warranted, but I think there were a lot of guys that maybe had worked for Dusty in the past that might have felt that they were treated unfairly, that looked at him like, we're going to humble him, which, there was a little, he wasn't welcomed with open arms in the locker room right away.
So normally I would say, without naming names, but screw that, name some names. Who would he have not been comfortable with? Probably guys who he used to work with and Jim Crockett.
Yeah. Essentially guys were
like
who
a Jake
worked
Roberts.
for him before.
Jake worked with him in Georgia. Would Jake have had a problem? Would Ted DiBiase have had a problem?
I think that it was more of, again, it goes back to that rumor and innuendo type thing.
Right.
And guys that had worked with him, maybe they felt they should have gotten a better payoff on this night or what have you. And this guy's going around in jets and mink coats and limousines and dropping all this money everywhere. There might have been a little jealousy there, but it was just a general overall feeling. Guys that had never met Dusty before
had a preconceived notion of what he was.
Preconceived notion.
I see.
And, when you get to know Dusty, he's one of the sweetest human beings you will ever have had the pleasure to have known and experienced. It takes a little while for him to open up and do that. And let somebody in.
Would any of the old timers from the WWF have taken, some of his counter programming, for people who maybe don't remember? Whenever the WWF would have a big event, the NWA would try to counter program it with a free event and just to try to distract. And there was lots of, heated rivalry stuff that was happening in the mid and late 80s. Would any of the old timers, like a Gorilla Monsoon, I don't mean to specifically name him, but a Lanza or whoever's there at the time, had some sort of mixed emotions about Dusty being there?
I think maybe on the surface they might have, but you mentioned Gorilla Monsoon. Gorilla welcomed him with open arms, and Gorilla was one of those guys who he and Dusty were friends when they had worked together in different places, and he knew Dusty, so he welcomed him with open arms.
Okay, time out. You just heard the beginning of "not a rib" as a cornerstone saying here on Something to Wrestle. Boy, we had a lot of talk like that in the very beginning of my conversations with Bruce, where we would sort of debunk stuff. A couple of them that you're going to hear here. The whole idea that Akeem wasn't a rib on Dusty, calling himself the African Dream, but maybe the biggest of which that I just think is hilarious. Naming Mike Jones Virgil and making him the manservant to the $1 Million Man. That's not a rib on Dusty. Of course it is. I also enjoyed hearing the first Vince McMahon impression of Bruce, And I often wonder these days, does he still dust that off in meetings, you know, with the rest of the writing staff or something? I can't imagine. It just is apparent to me listening to this back that Bruce was a natural storyteller and he was going to be great at podcasting. And we know that was the case. Oh, and how about Vince coming down to meet Dusty and supervise the vignettes? I wonder if he did that for Barry Darsow or Steve Kern. You think he was showing up for Repo Man shoots or Skinner shoots? He knew he had something with Dusty. Dusty was special. Dusty held a special spot in Vince's heart. I think that's apparent. Let's get back to it. Dusty Rhodes in the WWF.
You know,
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.